It was 1997. In January of that year, the video game company Square would release its 7th installment of the Final Fantasy series to the Japanese market. It would sell 2 million copies in its first 3 days alone. This line of RPG video games had clearly taken the country by storm. A small number of Final Fantasy games had made their way to the American market and was slowly finding a niche but loyal fan base there too. The NTSC version of Final Fantasy VII would reach stateside 8 months later in September of 1997. Over here in the UK, however, things were a little different. We had never played this thing called a Final Fantasy. None of the games up to that point had released over here yet, and because of this we had no examples to go from. We had no experience with the series at all. With our PAL version of Final Fantasy VII many months away from release, our initial hype of the announcement weren't as large as the rest of the world's reactions towards this game, at first. But then it started. Slowly. Magazines like CVG started talking about Final Fantasy VII over the coming months. It began as nothing more than small boxed out sections in their news coverage. A later issue had a full page dedicated to it. Then a double page spread. Only a few months away from release, now it's getting 4 pages. The month before release, CVG puts the game on hype for 7 whole pages of coverage. By this point, if you were reading this magazine on a monthly basis, you couldn't avoid this game. You had to be aware it was coming, surely. Final Fantasy VII releases in the UK. CVG does a 4-page review, giving it their highest score of 5 out of 5, claiming that if you owned a PlayStation, you had to get this game. They told you it was like nothing we had ever experienced before. CVG was singing so much praise they could have released a gospel R&B mixtape on the subject. They loved it that much. The hype was infectious. A large majority of PAL PlayStation owners went out to buy themselves a copy. Final Fantasy had arrived in the UK, with Final Fantasy VII being our first foray into the series, and history was made. And I missed the whole bloody thing. Hey DJ, can I get a rewind on this one, bruv? I gotta take it back a bit. Save. It was 1997. Picture me, 12 years old, and the proud owner of a Sega Saturn. Despite being one of only 3 students in my school year to actually own a Saturn, I didn't give in to ridicule or pressure to jump ship. I represented that console so ridiculously hard I could have tatted myself up with its logos. I loved the Saturn. I still love the Saturn to this day, and I genuinely believe it's one of the most slept on consoles of all time. But back then, as a youth, it meant I was also inexperienced, very narrow-minded, and too stubborn for my own good. I shunned the PlayStation for years, and because of that, the hype train surrounding games like Final Fantasy VII passed me by. Fast forward to the beginning of 1999. I'm 14 years old now. Support for the Saturn had ended since Sega set their focus towards the Dreamcast instead, and with that console not due for release in the PAL territory until the end of November, I suddenly found myself with nothing new to play for the year ahead. That's when my cousin calls me up and starts talking about this game he recently bought for his PC. Apparently it's a port of some big PlayStation game that had released a few years prior. In fact, he was playing it at that very moment while we spoke on the phone. In the background I can hear the music coming from his speakers. It sounded like some sort of battle music composed by a digital orchestra, instilling a sense of urgency and intensity as the notes climbed higher and higher. I fell silent, letting my cousin play the game while I just listened. Sounds of what appeared to be sword strikes and machine gun fire, followed by what I could only describe as a fading, shaking explosion, echoed down the phone line. And then the music stopped. Suddenly, fanfare, bright and delightful, signifying what I believed to be was success and triumph. What the hell was this game? I've sometimes spoken about how important music is to me. The Sonic series, Nights into Dreams, Streets of Rage, Phantasy Star Online, soundtracks that captured my heart and soul for being such fascinating games to listen to, let alone play. I love music, and here was a game I couldn't even see, I had no idea what it looked like, and it sounded incredible. In just 2 minutes from listening to some staticky, hissy broadcast of its audio down the phone line, I was intrigued. I started asking questions about the game. I wanted to know more. My cousin tells me it's not such a straightforward game to provide answers for because there was a lot to it. Way more than any average game we had played. At a time before I had internet access, he tells me to check old magazines to see if any of them had covered the game in the run-up to its release on the PlayStation. I would likely learn a lot more about it from those sources instead. So I hung up the phone, went to my room and backtracked through my old CVG magazines, and bringing this opening chapter full circle, there it was. Pages upon pages upon pages of coverage that I had simply ignored before. It had been sitting there for years and I just never gave it the time of day. I read everything multiple times. I learnt more about this game in a few hours than I had ever learned anything for any other game I had ever played, and I hadn't even actually played this one yet. I didn't own the game or the required system to play it on. But that was about to change. Around the school playground, the other kids found it strange that the Sega Saturn fanboys suddenly started talking about something that wasn't the Sega Saturn. Through my continuous ramblings regarding Final Fantasy VII, I met one dude who owned a PlayStation copy and was willing to sell it to me. It didn't matter that I lacked the required console to play on in the first place, that was a detail that could be taken care of later. The way I saw it, I had wasted too much time already and wasn't about to let this game pass me by any longer. I guess you could say I was somewhat keen. I now had a copy of the game in my hands, though without a PlayStation, all I could do was read the game manual. I specifically found the character profiles to be very interesting. Vincent Valentine looked like a badass. I liked him. After a couple of weeks and eventually getting my hands on a PlayStation, it was time. Sitting down with my cousins in attendance, it begins. Final Fantasy VII. Video game intros were common, of course. You usually had some sort of rolling gameplay demo or an attract mode if you were playing a port of an arcade game. Intros were designed to grab your attention whilst also setting the tone. If you were lucky, you'd even get some storyline details to get things going narratively. For me, there hadn't been a game before, nor has there been a game since, to capture such an amazing swing of emotions during its intro. I can't even begin to describe how it felt watching it play out for the first time, but I'll try. I'm given a sense of unease as the cosmos spins, stars twirling in every direction while ominous atmospheric noise spirals in conjunction with the visuals. At this point I'm wondering where this is going. An establishing shot maybe? Is it going to show a planet, a galactic explosion or something? It shows nothing, just the stars. It continues showing stars for over 40 seconds with no music or dialogue. The longer it goes on, the more uneasy I'm feeling because the unknown is the only thing I'm experiencing, anticipating something else to happen. Then, fade to a face. Someone is looking back at me. A character. Someone of importance. In the background I can hear a melody softly begin to play. A melody that instills a sense of intrigue and mystery. Camera tracks her as she walks out of the alleyway, footsteps echoing while the shot begins to pull back a bit. A vehicle drives by in front of her just as a drum kicks in. Music notes rising, drums keeping a steady progression, camera pulling back further, gaining speed, music building up in intensity, establishing shot of where we are. We are in a huge city with the music reaching a crescendo as the game's logo flashes on screen. The logo sits for a while before fading, but the music continues. The shot of the city lingers. Again, I'm wondering, why is it hanging there? Something happens. A quick cut to a train at high speed and back again. The camera now begins to zoom into a different part of the city. As we dive downwards, the music slowly starts to give way. From a high-angle view, we now see the train approaching a station, its horn blaring out over the nighttime sky. The song is changing. Hi-hats begin ticking steadily. The train reaches its destination as a frantic and disorientating piano kicks in. Characters exit the train, attacking guards and causing chaos. This is now a case of urgency. Something serious is happening and I am on alert. A rather flashy entrance by one character in particular grabs my attention the most. This is the character I'll be playing as. This is Cloud Strife. I enter my first battle and noises I had only heard over the phone a few weeks ago suddenly have visual representation. I won my first battle. Cloud with his awesome looking sword spins it around and strikes a confident pose before I am rewarded with a level up. I feel so great right now. In 5 minutes, Final Fantasy VII has already taken me on a ride that I had never felt from a video game's introduction before. From unease, to intrigue, to urgency, to action, and finally reward. All from a string of cutscenes directly into gameplay. I have not just been invited into the world of Final Fantasy VII, the game has grabbed me by the collar and has thrown me headfirst into it. Yeah, it was 1999 and I was late to the party by about 2 years, but my god was I glad to finally have arrived at all. This was amazing. Then, something odd happened. Technically speaking, Final Fantasy VII wasn't the first RPG I had ever played. Panzer Dragoon Saga on the Sega Saturn would be the first, and that was mostly by chance. In the UK, the entire first disc of Panzer Dragoon Saga came as part of a promotional deal with the official Sega Saturn magazine. I was a huge collector of Sega Saturn magazines, so I ended up with a copy of the first disc. I played it, and while I liked the story and its visual style, the turn-based combat confused me. It was unlike anything else I had played in my life by that point, so I ended up dying a lot. I just didn't really know it at the time, but I was playing an RPG. It was very new to me. Upon playing Final Fantasy VII and experiencing the core of its turn-based combat, it reminded me of what I had experienced when playing Panzer Dragoon Saga a year earlier, and as history was about to repeat itself, the further I progressed in Final Fantasy VII, the more I ended up seeing those game over screens. I simply wasn't used to what an RPG was yet. The 14-year-old version of me found it challenging to adapt to. I panicked a lot when navigating menus during combat. I would get lost in them as I frantically tried to find the option I wanted. I had no idea which items had what effect, and numerous turns were wasted by me making incorrect choices. Stat screens were a nightmare. What the bloody hell are all these numbers? I can't handle numbers. I failed all my maths exams as a kid because I'm terrible with numbers, and now I've got a game full of them? What are you doing to me? I was having a tough time getting to grips with what an RPG was. I didn't dislike it though, not at all. I just felt very uncomfortable, and strange to say it, but I was frightened. Action games are spur-of-the-moment decisions, instant actions and reactions, but Final Fantasy VII was asking me to prepare and plan. My actions are choices made in advance. I needed to think long-term, and failing meant I had planned poorly. And so failing as much as I did, I felt kinda stupid. You're probably expecting me to say that at this point I abandoned the game. No, that didn't happen. So if that wasn't the case, now you're probably expecting me to say that I knuckled down and got good at Final Fantasy VII through trial and error. Technically that didn't happen either, at least not for another couple of years. No, what ended up happening was something different. By this point in my playthrough, enough had happened for me to become emotionally invested. The name Sephiroth had been mentioned. Some of Aerith's backstory had been presented to me. The Turks had introduced themselves, especially Reno, who I thought was just the coolest bloody thing in the world at that point, and Barrett had suffered a terrible heartbreaking defeat at Sector 7. I had never felt such a gut punch like that in a video game before. And then there was Tifa. Wonderful, amazing Tifa Lockhart. I was smitten by her, completely love-struck. It was clear I was in too deep to actually let go of Final Fantasy VII, but I just wasn't mentally prepared to learn a whole new genre of video game to continue my journey with it. So, what did I do? I did the one thing that nobody ever wanted to do when playing a video game amongst friends or siblings. I willingly and happily passed the control pad to my cousin, the guy who told me about this game in the first place. I wanted him to take over. In later years, I would pick the game back up myself, I would play other RPGs and learn about turn-based combat, I would learn Final Fantasy VII's materia system and get good on my own in my own time, but at that very point, during my initial playthrough, my limited understanding of RPGs was hindering me from continuing the story, and I couldn't handle that. Sounds like I was pussying out, doesn't it? And I guess that's correct, yeah, but something wonderful happened as a result. The choice I made went on to mold my first playthrough into a whole different experience entirely. It had now become a team-orientated endeavour, a joint expedition. My cousin focused on the gameplay since he was accustomed to it, making combat decisions and preparing inventory for the road ahead. I focused on keeping track of the story, reading the text out loud to our group and acting as somewhat of a narrator. I made mental notes on characters we had encountered, places we had been, places we needed to go, and things we needed to do. My cousin was the tactician and field commander, and I was the record keeper and somewhat navigator. Just like tabletop RPGs designed to be played by a group of people as a team, here was a small band of cousins sitting down and playing an RPG video game together in the same fashion. This was a whole new experience for me. Yeah, we had played video games together before, but never like this. Never as a collaborative effort. Final Fantasy VII was now an event for us every single weekend for the next 3 months. We would meet up, bunker down with cans of Coca-Cola and load up the save file to continue our journey. I purchased the Brady Games Guide, gaining knowledge into where certain enemies were and what rare material was located around the world map, and that book became the most sacred item of our adventure. It's got so much wear and tear because we used it that much. Me and my cousins went through the story together, getting hit by the same plot twists together, reacting amongst ourselves in response to what we would see unfold on our tiny little television screen. On weekends when me and my cousins couldn't meet, I would load the save file up myself and spend time XP grinding. I had learnt the basics of combat by this point, so some easy low-level enemies that earned us decent experience points was something I could handle on my own. I saw those moments like little training sessions in between the days when we would progress the story. It felt like everything we were doing towards Final Fantasy VII was in itself a journey. Playing the game as a party of our own was our own real-world adventure. None of us had ever played a game for this long before either. Final Fantasy VII had so many different things to see and do that by the time we were reaching the end game, we had easily sunk over 50 hours into it. And sadly, there looms the dreaded word. The end game. The final dungeon, the final boss, the final string of cutscenes, it was waiting there for us. Our journey was about to reach its end. I think we were expecting a reward. I know I was. I mean, video games tend to provide you with some sort of satisfaction upon completing them, that's the usual procedure. Final Fantasy VII did something else to us. Another unique thing in an already long list of unique things that happened to me when I experienced this game for the first time. When we finished playing, the PlayStation version has this starry end screen to signify that the game has now concluded. At the time, me and my cousins didn't know what this screen meant. Initially, we presumed it was another cutscene. I mean, 50 hours in, the game was still giving us story development, so who was to say this wasn't another plot point? And we sat there. We just sat there for 10 minutes looking at this screen as the stars slowly flew by. We began discussing what we should do. It looks like the game is over, but this screen is on right now and it's not going anywhere, so it might be another cutscene. Maybe there's a hidden ending if we leave it. Like, should we wait to see if something else happens? We decided to leave the console running for a little while longer. We went away to eat something, came back, and the stars were still scrolling. Realizing it had been running for around an hour by this point, it was safe to say that there was nothing else left for the game to show us. This was when yet another interesting and unique thing happened. The topic of discussion shifted from if we should turn the console off or not, to who from our group was actually going to turn the console off in general, because neither me nor my cousin wanted to be the one to do it. I can't speak for my cousin on his reasons, but mine was out of apprehension. I didn't want to say goodbye. For over 50 hours, I had befriended a cast of wonderful personalities. They had let me into their lives. I followed them through their journeys. I grew attached to them, and I was having trouble accepting the fact that it was over. The thought of never getting to experience new moments with them started to depress me. To turn off the console was to leave them behind and depart from that world. I actually couldn't handle that. Ultimately, it was my cousin who turned the console off, sending the room into silence. Our friends were gone, and the journey was over. My initial run of Final Fantasy VII was one of the most unique and memorable playthroughs of a video game I had ever experienced in my life. To this day, while I've thoroughly enjoyed other adventures with various other titles, nothing has ever quite matched what Final Fantasy VII did to me back in 1999. The tail end of that year saw the release of Final Fantasy VIII, a game which I actually hold a warm fondness for, but overall couldn't quite recreate the feelings Final Fantasy VII gave me. The Dreamcast had also arrived, bringing with it such amazing titles like Phantasy Star Online, a game that I cherish as one of my all-time favourites, and it left its own particular mark on me for other reasons. It still didn't hit me the way Final Fantasy VII had hit me though. I'm not saying Final Fantasy VII became a benchmark that other games had to beat, because I was still able to enjoy all of these other games on their own merits, but if we're being honest, deep down it felt like something was missing. I longed to see Cloud, Tifa and everybody else again, and I couldn't shake that feeling. I genuinely missed them. It seemed a lot of other people did too. Over time, Final Fantasy VII characters would begin popping up in cameos across other games, as fighting characters in Erguise to secret characters in other RPGs like Final Fantasy Tactics. Kingdom Hearts was suddenly the strangest collaboration between two companies, and slapped right in the middle of it were characters like Cid, Aerith and Cloud, and it was nice to see them again in all of these strange and different ways. Cameos and short roles were good at keeping the characters alive in one fashion or another, but it wasn't quite the same, was it? It never felt like home, if you catch my drift. The popularity surrounding Final Fantasy VII was clearly astounding. Square themselves recognized this as a good business opportunity to provide more Final Fantasy VII related content to the demanding audience while earning further profits in return. In 2003 through to 2009, a series of side stories told through films and spin-off games came to fruition as a result. Collecting under the title The Compilation of Final Fantasy VII, each entry was designed to build upon the existing lore as well as flesh out certain characters further. This excited me more than anything up to that point. To return to their world and spend time with these characters again was precisely what I had wanted. Advent Children was looking like it was going to be the sickest movie I'd ever see. Dirge of Cerberus was putting one of my favourite cast members at the front and centre. Crisis Core was going to educate me on another character I had wanted to learn more about. I was geeked. It felt like a dream come true. In concept, the compilation was a solid idea, but execution can be a tricky thing, especially if you now have all these other people sticking their hands into the pot. It's difficult to maintain a sense of consistency. You also run the risk of tampering with something that could easily be broken, and as much as I don't like saying this, for every neat thing the compilation did, I feel it equally detracted something else from it. The Advent Children movie was a brilliant spectacle of action. I had never seen these characters move like this. It was breathtaking at the time, and it's still impressive by today's standards. Cloud finding strength from his memory of Zack was a personal highlight of the film, and I loved that scene so much, I can't help but get a little teary-eyed when I rewatch it. But for as decent as all this was, I felt the movie also tilted some characters off balance. The Turks, while still a fun bunch, were now reduced to being the punching bags and comedy act. Characters who had seemingly died in the game were now alive in this movie without explanation. And then there's Cloud. Cloud got a bad rap for being too emo in this film, but I don't actually have a problem with that. His arc was fine. He was mourning the loss of some very important people to him, so I don't have an issue with how he was portrayed. He had every reason to be depressed. What I feel became an issue was, after this film, Cloud kept being depicted as emo from there on, as if this was his new default mood, when that wasn't meant to be what defined him at all. It was just an arc of a bigger story. Advent Children was nice, but it left a strange taste in my mouth. Dirge of Cerberus put fan favourite character Vincent Valentine into the lead role, with the story taking place after the events of the original game. While it covered some of the details surrounding Vincent's history, as well as expand upon the world's lore, the influx of new characters that lacked any considerable depth hindered the game with distractions. For every small moment that we learnt more about Vincent, we were suffocatingly required to spend tons of time with other characters who had nothing worthy to contribute. And the less said about the gameplay, the better. I came away from Dirge of Cerberus feeling very disappointed overall. Crisis Core gave us insight into the character of Zack Fair, whose role in the original game was crucial but hardly given any substantial screen time, so this was his chance to shine. I absolutely ended up adoring Zack Fair. Not only did I learn more about him, but he also helped to flesh out other cast members like Aerith and Cloud in the process. The bond between Cloud and Zack is especially heartwarming as it is heartbreaking. Parts of this game felt like an honest, genuine prequel to Final Fantasy VII, and if anything, Zack became one of my most favourite characters of all time thanks to this game. It done a lot of great things for him. But for some reason, Square decided to pile on too much to an already established plotline when the story didn't really need it. The introduction of entirely new characters like Genesis ended up convoluting the story to the point of confusion, and I don't like his inclusion to the lore at all, but that's just my take on it. Despite my criticisms, I did appreciate the compilation. It gave me my favourite characters again, and although it wasn't without numerous flaws, when these characters were the main focus, the time spent with those characters was nice. I was happy to be in their company again. But it wasn't quite the same, was it? It felt like home, but somebody had thrown out my favourite chair for one that wasn't as comfortable. It's clear a lot of people weren't ready to let go of Final Fantasy VII. I know I wasn't, but despite this, it sometimes felt like that their world was in jeopardy the more we remained in it. So, what do we do? Where do we go with it now? There's an answer for that, but to talk about it, we're going to have to travel back in time again. Back to a little event known as E3. It was 2005 when Square, probably unintentionally, planted a seed that would grow beyond their control for years afterwards. It was E3. The PlayStation 3 was due for release the following year, so now was a better time than any to show off what the system could do on a graphical level. You've got the stage, you've got the video game community watching you, do your thing. A trailer begins. Stars spinning ominously before fading to a familiar female character that instills a sense of intrigue and mystery. Wait a second, I recognize this. We walk with her as the camera pulls back and zooms out higher and higher until Midgar in all its glory, and it looks incredible. What's going on here? A logo flash before fading away as the camera dips, the music changing, a sense of urgency fills the nighttime sky. Train arriving at a platform, spiky-haired protagonist with a 7-foot sword leaps from the train striking a pose, and I have officially passed out by this point. Square had lovingly recreated the intro to Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 3. It looked gorgeous. It looked amazing. And then the president of Square came on after and said it was just a tech demo and there were no plans to remake Final Fantasy VII at that time. He laughed. And the crowd laughed as well. Did he say something funny? Was he telling a joke?
'Cause I'm not fucking laughing, Nicholas.
I couldn't believe what I had just seen. One of the greatest intros to a video game that I had ever experienced had been remade in shiny new HD graphics. It took my breath away, and it was nothing more than a demonstration. Let me ask you lot something, yeah? Have you ever seen something that you didn't realize you needed until you saw it? Well, that happened to me that very day. That was it. I wanted this. I wanted this so badly. I wanted a Final Fantasy VII remake. So did a lot of other people, because for years on end afterwards, Square were constantly asked if they were ever going to remake Final Fantasy VII. They accidentally opened a floodgate and I don't think they knew how to close it. At that point in time, the compilation was in full swing, so speculation began on whether or not a Final Fantasy VII remake would be an entry to the compilation, bringing us full circle back to the very title that started it all. It seemed like a no-brainer. Square could easily sell bucket loads on a remake. Fans would ask them, interviewers would ask them, everybody who spoke to them was asking for a Final Fantasy VII remake. At first I believed it would happen. As I said, a no-brainer. It had to eventually happen, right? There was too much demand for it. Surely they're working on it quietly. Years went by, E3 after E3, no surprise reveals, no sign of a remake. I held strong onto my belief. It's gonna come, I promise you bruv, they'd be stupid not to remake Final Fantasy VII. The compilation of Final Fantasy VII wraps up. Square's focus is now on various other Final Fantasy titles. Damn, well, okay. Maybe they're just going to get through these games first, and then they'll come back around to tackle Final Fantasy VII Remake. They're probably just needing to free up their schedule or something, right? Interviewers are still asking, fans are still asking, Square are still saying they have no plans for a remake. I'm trying to hold my ground on this, but it's getting difficult now. Any supposed leaks all turn out to be fake, and I'm beginning to waver. Square had been avoiding the subject for such a long time. They would have folded by now. Someone somewhere would have said something if a remake actually existed. A genuine leak would have occurred. Nobody would have been able to keep this subject quiet for this long. I wanted it, but I started to believe I was never going to get it. I think it was around E3 2013 where I had put the dream to rest. I just couldn't keep watching the same event every year with my hopes up so high, only for them to be continuously crashed afterwards. I didn't want to feel that disappointment anymore. I was done with it. It's the day before E3 begins. A leak goes out saying that a Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be announced at this year's E3. Yeah, whatever man, get lost, I've heard it before. It's the day of Sony's conference. They're on stage doing their thing again, and I expected nothing.
Now, many years ago, Square Enix released a groundbreaking title that went on to become one of the most beloved games in PlayStation and video game history. We have a very special treat for everyone.
I don't have recorded footage of my reaction to this, which is a shame in hindsight, as it was one of the most unfiltered, rawest reactions I think I have ever experienced from a video game announcement. We'll just have to make do with an explanation of what happened to me instead. At this point, I'm listening to what this man is saying and I'm not buying it. He's talking about a legendary Square game that made history. It's too obvious, he's baiting us, I know he is. There's no way he's talking about Final Fantasy VII. The trailer starts. I'm seeing things that look familiar, but I'm still not buying it. I mean, we don't even know what it actually is yet anyway.
Yet with each fond remembrance, we knew those encountered were not forgotten. That someday we would see them again.
The narrator for the trailer begins speaking vaguely about seeing them again. In fact, everything he's saying seems way too vague to be taken in context to what is being shown on screen. It feels like he's doing more than talking about the game. He's talking to us, the audience. He's talking to me.
Perhaps it was no more than wishful thinking.
I think it was around the point when he said the words wishful thinking that I let out my first mumblings of a reaction. Oh my god. A common phrase used every day by many people, we hear it all the time. It wasn't the words I said that was surprising. It was the fact that I didn't actually choose to say them. I didn't draw for the phrase consciously. My emotions were reacting purely on their own, and the only words my brain could seem to find at that moment was, oh my god. The trailer continued. Midgar is shown, with the camera swooping down into the slums. The narrator hits the punchline that rings out the most to me.
For they are coming back.
Words are literally failing me. My lip is quivering, my voice is shaking. I still can't actually control the words that are leaving my mouth. I am reacting purely out of my own control. The Buster Sword being carried on Cloud's back enters the frame.
At last, the promise has been made.
I'm trying to hold back tears because there's still a part of me that can't believe what I'm seeing, but it's no good. I am on the edge. I broke down into a stream of tears, crying uncontrollably like a little child. Under a flustered voice, I'm still uttering the phrase, oh my god, because everything is on autopilot. The crowd at the show erupt in applause, the internet is lit up, social networks are on fire, it's actually happening. The Final Fantasy VII Remake exists, and I am an emotional mess, sat back in my chair trying to process what the hell just happened, because I had never, ever experienced a reaction to anything like that before. Square knew how to approach this one. The objective for the trailer was to touch on all the years of speculation, rumour and waiting to make sure they were speaking to the fans directly. Wishful thinking. After a long period of silence suddenly begins a stir. The reunion may bring joy, it may bring fear, but let us embrace whatever it brings. The promise being made and our friends coming back to see us once again. This trailer plucked at every heartstring I had. It was a beautiful moment for me, and judging by the internet's reaction, a beautiful moment for millions of other people. Square understood us. They understood their game, and they understood what they had to do. It was time to head back to Final Fantasy VII. The year is 2020. Final Fantasy VII Remake is arriving slightly later than planned due to some delays in development. The new release date, providing they don't push it back any further, would be April 10th, 2020. This date is significant to me because that's my birthday. From seeing the PlayStation 3's tech demo back in 2005 right up until the remake's release, I will have been waiting almost 15 years to play this game. 15 years. Waiting on something that wasn't even guaranteed. Foolish me, of course, but I guess I live my life like that. I like to dream. It's in my nature. Looking back on the remake's reveal and my reaction to it, I can now see why I lost myself in the moment. I had travelled a long journey with these hopes and wishes. When you want something so much, to finally be granted what your heart desires can feel unreal. Sometimes I still can't believe it's actually happening, but it is. It's real, and it looks better than anything I could have dreamt up. I am going to take time to sit down and play this game at my own pace. I want to savour everything it has to offer. I want to absorb it all. If there ever was a game that required such a commitment from me, this would be it. I'm going to keep my expectations to myself for the most part, but I will echo what the reveal trailer said, just to leave you all with something to think over. Whether this remake brings you joy or fear, embrace whatever it brings. We're on the cusp of something else. The remake can never overwrite what had been established before, nor can it erase our memories of the original. It will not wipe out our history we all have with Final Fantasy VII on a personal level, and that isn't the remake's intentions either. But what it can do is allow us, all of us, to journey forwards into a new era, together, and maybe make some brand new memories as a result. I'm DiGi Valentine, and I am a fan of Final Fantasy VII. I just wanted to share my history with you all, and now I encourage you to share your own. Thanks for watching.